So I've said it before and I'll say it again. No GM is infallible, and in my opinion, something that makes a truly great GM is all about reflecting on what you did wrong and not on what you did right. And so this video is me reflecting on what I did wrong in my live stream. If you want to see where I made those mistakes and possibly learn from them, which is the whole point of this video, stick around. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of How to Be a Great GM. In today's episode, I'm looking at what went wrong in my live games. You can catch those every single day live streamed on this channel as well as on Twitch, twitch.tv/greatgm, where I take a ragtag bunch of wonderful role players. I have to say, I think they're some of the best role players I have had the wonderful pleasure of playing with, and I have played with many, many great role players. They really have an amazing energy, given the fact that I made some mistakes before the game even started. And I'm going to show you what those mistakes were in a little bit. So we have a live stream that runs every day during this week anyway, and next week who knows what might happen. But these are the mistakes that I have made, and if I've missed some, let me know in the chat down below. Why? Because I want to learn and I want to improve my skills as a game master. So let's get right into it. There are 3 periods when you can make mistakes. In my opinion, these are the only 3 periods that one really has in which to make those mistakes. But anyway, that's the pre-game, during the game, and post the game. So if you are running a session, if you're going to run a session, you need to be aware at all 3 points you can make quite a few mistakes that may or may not influence the game's outcome. Now, the game, I have to say, I still think was fairly successful. The players had a lot of fun and they can't wait to play again today. And as a matter of fact, I've had a lot of the players asking me if we could extend the duration of play because they had so much fun. So it obviously worked. I, however, decided, what's the point of making a video on what went right? We want to know what went wrong. And there were many things that went wrong. So in the pre-game, one of the things that I did incorrectly, and this is a mistake that is born out of excitement and exuberance rather than anything else, is that it's a new system. It's a completely new system to the point that we are rewriting it as we play it. It's a system that I came up with called the try system. And it really is about trying almost anything and having rules that will allow you to facilitate that. What we saw during the first session was the characters were trying things. They were trying to do things, and the system was working. The problem was there was a lot of crunching happening. There were a lot of numbers happening. When I was introducing the system to the guys, I said, right, this is it. This is how it works. Are there any questions? Everyone was fairly quiet. There were some questions going on, but I didn't take time to step through each of the processes. And I only spent about 15 minutes before we started playing showing them a mock battle as to how it might work out. But I didn't give them a gigantic fight to show them how deadly the system was. I quite literally just gave them basic stuff to fight, which they dispatched in a single round. We don't want combat to last too long anyway, because after a while it does just become a roll a number, roll a number, roll a number. So we wanted to be fairly quick, but I was so nervous that I actually posted on Facebook, I think I'm going to kill my party tonight. The system is particularly ruthless, and I don't think I spent enough time working with the players to show them just how ruthless it was. Compound that with the fact that during the session they discovered that magic has grown in power, and suddenly I have created for myself a gigantic problem. The system is already very deadly, and now I've made it even more deadly by monkeying around with mechanics that no one understands. So it's a mistake to take something that you think you understand and then to really twist it up and not think about the long-term consequences. So that is definitely something that I did. We also didn't have a session 0. The team was put together very, very quickly. I came up with the idea to do a game, to run a game, and kind of got the team assembled by Friday. We had a change in team, which, again, it wasn't a problem. It was an understandable change. But the new team, well, they'd never played with each other before. They'd never experienced one another as role players. I have role played with each one of them individually and with different groups, but group dynamic didn't exist at this point in time. So during the pregame, not only was there no session 0, there was no opportunity for the players to get used to their characters or to define who their characters were or how their relationships would work. I've had players come to me since yesterday's stream, since yesterday's game, quite literally saying, well, I feel like perhaps there's a division starting to form and I'm going to try and figure that out. That division should have been resolved in the session 0. There wasn't a session 0, and so we now have to try and figure out how to use that in our game moving forward. Thankfully, my players are all mature enough that when we raise that before today's game, they'll all go, oh, yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, let's change this, let's tweak that. Under normal circumstances, though, this might not have been raised, especially if it wasn't a stream. That's one of the things that we have as a major bonus with this particular game, which you won't necessarily have at home. Because it's a streamed game, the players are more dedicated to resolving things so that the stream can continue than they might be if it was a casual game that everyone's just sitting around the table. That's one of the big differences between a streamed game, in my opinion, and a home game, is the stream game inserts all of this meta pressure that there are viewers, there are people who are deriving entertainment from watching the game, so there's a bit of a more dedication to being, I don't want to say more flexible, but more accommodating, definitely. So no session 0. My poor players had to figure out their character personalities based on their written stuff that they had submitted beforehand and were literally thrown into the deep end in terms of the actual campaign itself. And you're going to see how that became a problem in the actual gameplay. As with new players, they haven't played together before, so there's no understanding of boundaries. Has this person got a good sense of humour? Can I be condescending towards their character and will they pick up on it? It's definitely something to bear in mind. More mature players, it's okay. So with these guys, they understand where they're going. With inexperienced people, if you're playing someone who's domineering and loud, that's the character, not the player. The player might very well be a nice person, but new players won't necessarily know that. If they haven't played together and said, well, do you mind if my character's a bit like this or a little bit like that? That wasn't there. So a whole lot of stuff didn't happen in the pre-game section that should have happened by all rights. Now we get into the actual game itself. During the game, the biggest thing that came up, and this was mentioned not by the players, they're too polite, I think, but certainly by those who were watching the game, which effectively is by those who are participating in the game. My accent was awful. Absolutely awful. Now this channel, I've done videos on how to do a good accent and how to position your mouth so that your mouth makes the accent happen for you. I was trying to do a French accent and it drifted from French into, I think someone pointed out there was some Russian going on, then there was some German, and then possibly some Norwegian, and someone even said Welsh came into it. It was a disaster, an absolute disaster. And why was it a disaster? Because I hadn't practiced any accents beforehand. Usually, I like to do accents, I'll spend the afternoon thinking, well, I think this NPC should be French. In which case, then, I have to speak as if I am French and put on the French accent and realize that that's how the mouth works and this is where the tongue goes, and it might not sound French to you, but as long as it's consistent in whatever it does sound like, it becomes part of the character. When the accent drifts all over the place, there's a lot of immersion breaking because the players are sitting there going, this is a GM doing a bad accent. So even with lots of practice, you can get it wrong. Now, I just didn't prep accents. So today, or yesterday's video in it, because of the time that this video is coming out, the principal character that they're going to be meeting, hopefully, if they continue on the path that they're following, I will have practiced that accent to avoid this kind of thing. It's not a huge thing. And I would always encourage you to try and do accents and to try and push your game to the next level rather than to avoid doing it because you're worried that it might be a bad accent. It's still, in my opinion, a great technique for creating memorable characters and for creating a slightly different world to the one that we are normally in, and that's part of the escapism and the appeal of the game. Now, the plot. I had worked out the plot beautifully, in my opinion, using my tables, and I had it all worked out, and I'd done the maps according to the plot, and the player characters, because there was no session 0, because there was new players working out how they operated, let alone how anything else operated, when they arrived at the plot giver, when they got to the point where, okay, here is the plot, this is what you guys are going to do, it came out very muddled. And they were searching for plot. Searching for plot is when the players are going, I don't know what the mission is here, so I'm going to keep asking questions until eventually it's revealed. Now, you might not notice it when you're watching the stream, but the players were asking a lot. At one point, the players went, oh, well, then we're done. We can leave, because the plot appears to have been resolved by somebody else. It was at that point that I realized they don't see a plot here. And I struggled to get them to that point because I didn't know how they as players, or more particularly as a group, worked and responded to each other. So one of the players was basically looking not at a diplomatic incident, but looking to present their character, to figure out their voice, and that was to be slightly aggressive. So the plot suffered in terms of what they actually needed to do. And even now, if I were to ask them, what do you think the actual plot is? They'd go, well, there's something happening at the graveyard to someone. We're not even sure. We don't think anyone's even there anymore. One of the players, thankfully, came to my rescue and said, oh, well, then there must be someone who's doing something in the graveyard. So let's go and have a look. That's very sloppy GM work, in my opinion. They should have had a fairly clear mission. There is something happening in the graveyard and they need to go there. They should have gotten that from the NPCs, not from them desperately trying to fill in for my lack of information. I was overwhelmed because I was stuck on the accent and I kept waffling over the accent, and then the party was trying to figure out who they were. So there was a lot of that. My table control was also particularly weak. One thing that is very, very, very useful when doing a live stream is that the characters need to not talk over each other. We had a lot of that happening in the very first session because the players were new to the whole thing, not new to live streaming, new to working with each other. So figuring out each other's timing and pacing. Do you need that sort of thing around an actual table? Well, yes, you do. It's polite manners to let somebody else finish their sentence before you then jump in with your options. So there's a lot to be learned about table control, and I really need to focus on making sure that I work through each and every single one of the players to give them each time to do stuff. They're still trying to figure out who their characters are. They're still trying to work out, okay, well, this is how we work as a party. I need to give them some time to do that. So those are the things basically that I felt were lacking from the first episode. Accent prep, that's definitely on me. Clarity of plot, well, I will work on that and make sure it is a lot clearer. Why? Because the second episode, which will have already aired by the time of this video, so I have very little knowledge on how well I did there. I hope I have done better. Has some riddles in it which need to be solved, so that needs to be done very clearly. I must make sure that I achieve that. Now, post game, after the game, we finished the game. It was absolutely fantastic. I hadn't taken any notes. I had written down one sentence. Here it is. These are the notes I took. There's the initiative that I wrote down, and there is the one sentence, Prophecy of the Moon. I don't know who said it. I don't know what I mentioned thereafter. It is a mystery, a complete mystery. Thankfully, I can go and watch the episode again, and I have done so, and went, oh, That's who it is. So now I can take notes. So when I take notes, I end up with almost 7 or 8 very separate entries of things that I said, that I seeded, that the players said, that the players hinted at, which I can now incorporate. I didn't pay attention during the show, and that is simply because I was focused everywhere else. I was looking at screens. That's my bad. I choose to do a live stream. I completely accept that. But that's one of the mistakes I made. I did not take notes, and that is something that you should be doing as often as you can. More notes is always better than less notes. I stopped that session, and here's a confession. I went almost immediately into another session. This one was a private game that I was very excited for. It's with 3 old role-playing buddies that I haven't role-played with for decades. And as a result, the session ended and my brain immediately switched to the next session. A lot of us try to cram in as much as we can when we can, and especially during these times now where we've got lots of time on our hands. Not finishing off, I think, is very important. When your session concludes, review, go back, think about it. It's fresh in your mind now. Now is the time to make notes. What are you going to do in the next session? What are you going to do about those things? What are your thoughts on those characters that your character met? What are your notes? What are those hopefully copious notes that you've done, and how do they link into the next session? Don't finish a session and then go play board games, or finish a session and go out for pizza. Finish a session and just take 15 to 20 minutes to gather your thoughts and to just round off, to finish off that session for that particular day. It really makes a huge difference. And then, because I was rushing off to another session, I didn't give any notes to my players. Now, these are not notes in terms of, oh, I think your accent was awful. I don't think what you did there was very smart. It was literally about saying, guys, I think you did a great job. I think you did a wonderful job. Thank you for participating. I really liked what your character did there. I really liked what your character did there. How do you feel your characters interacted? Do you have any pain points? Do you have any notes coming back for me? Again, I know it sounds like there's a lot of administration going on here, but how else do you know if your game was successful or not? During my live shows where I'm answering your questions, I frequently get asked, what sort of questions should I be asking my players after a game, or should I even be asking them that questions? So yes, you should be. And things like, what is going to happen next? What do you think is going to happen next? That is gold. That is your players giving you another adventure without you having to do any work. What do you think is going to happen next? Oh, I think dragons are going to fly in because there was that scale that we found. Dragons are going to fly in, you say. Well, there's a potential plot twist. There's an extension to your adventure because dragons do fly in, because the player thought they were going to happen. When it does happen, the player's going to sit back pleased as punch that they anticipated what was coming up. So I didn't give notes to the players, and I didn't get notes back from my players. These are the mistakes that I feel that I made during this session. I hope that by seeing these, you can appreciate that there's a lot going on, and it can be very daunting for a new GM or for someone who is not completely confident in their skills, that these mistakes are going to happen. I hope that by seeing someone like myself who plays games every week and who's been doing it since the beginning of time, I still make mistakes, and yet the bottom line is we still have fun and we still come back to the table every single time. Now, some more insight. I was looking at what I had done in reflection. Luckily for me, I could also watch it on YouTube. And I avoided rules questions a lot by sort of just hand waving and saying, okay, well, it's a this or it's a that or it's the next thing, to keep the game moving forward. I think that was okay, but there were occasions where I suddenly got bogged down in the rules question, and the result, and I could kick myself for this, the result was that I wasn't present when one of my players was giving me role-playing gold. I have apologized to that player because I feel that that role player was giving their all, And as a GM, my response was, okay, you can roll that. I hadn't heard what they said. I hadn't paid attention to what they were doing because I was looking up a rule rather than being present in the game. The character took their action. They were successful at it, thankfully, but I missed a great opportunity. And for that, I'm truly sorry. I have tools at my disposal. Now, if you watched last week's video where we were talking about who controls what and who guides what and who leads what to where and all those kinds of wonderful things, the tools should act as a guide. And I was looking at the tool that I was using, Dungeon Fog, Campaign Viewer, as it's called, which is basically a projection of the map that you've made in Dungeon Fog. I was looking at that going, I can keep better track of initiative if I write it into the map rather than try to write it on a separate piece of paper and get distracted and that sort of thing. So what I maybe could do right is being able to reflect on what I did wrong and to improve upon it in the next session. That for me is the critical thing. Not to go and, oh, I did all this wrong, it's useless, I don't need to be, I'm just going to give up being a GM. That's absolutely the wrong attitude to have. The correct attitude is to say, I made that mistake, that mistake, that mistake, that mistake. How do I improve? And this is how I improve. And to realize that you'll probably be improving for as long as you're role playing, because there's always going to be something that you can do better. But by accepting that and embracing it and taking it on as a challenge, I think it will also prevent you from becoming bored as a game master. Because you're going, well, I did that wrong. Let's try and do it right this time around. Let's try and do it this way. Let's try and do it that way. Anyway, those are my particular thoughts on the subject of what I did wrong in this week's stream. This is a short and sharp video, he said, looking at the time, realizing it's taken 22 minutes. So ignore that last sentence. This is a long video on me waxing lyrical about how I made a mistake. What sort of mistakes do you make and try and learn from? Do you find yourself making the same mistake over and over again? In which case, are you trying to correct it? And perhaps you don't know how to correct it. My advice would be join me on Sundays at 7 p.m. GMT, which I think is lunchtime, 12 o'clock Pacific time. Join me and ask, I have this problem. What can I do? How can I fix it? It's a live show where you get to ask your questions. I might not have the answers for you, but someone in the chat may very well do so. The chat is wonderful during those live streams. Everyone trying to help everybody else to improve and just to have a better game. Until we meet again, I wish you and yours the very happiest of gaming.